Hi. So I'm a fifth-year medical student on a six-year medical program in Poznań, the Poznań University of Medical Sciences in Poland. So I've been asked to make a video on how I approached step one and to maybe share what I found helpful and what I didn't find helpful. And I've thought as to how to approach this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down into a few sections. One section is going to be how to approach the step. The second is how, when you're actually working through your UWorld blocks, and how, when you're actually in dedicated, there's a few tricks to help you. And the third is just some extra stuff in addition to that. So here we go. I don't have a recording studio. I don't have a fancy lighting setup. I'm recording off my phone. I live in a studio apartment, so I've chosen the least offensive corner of the room to record in. So I'm hoping if you bear with me through this less than impressive audio and visual treat, at least there'll be some hopefully helpful tips for you to learn from and to pick up perhaps. I'd also just like to share that I'm not a particularly intelligent person. I've got a big head, but there's not much inside it. It's just fluid. But no, what I want to say is that concepts do take me a little bit longer than most to learn. I do often get hung up and tripped up on details. Before I came to medical school, I worked as a builder. I was stacking bricks and painting walls. So what do I mean to say by all that? What I mean to say is, ultimately, if I can do this, trust me, you can too. You don't have to be quick, you don't have to be sharp, you just have to be willing to put in the effort, put in the time, do a little bit of planning. And you will get a good step score as long as you put in that time and effort. So one of the first things that I want to discuss is Anki. I'm sure you've come across it, tried it, at the very least you've heard of it. I gave it a try a couple times early on in medical school, but it was only the third time that I tried it that I really got it and that it really started to work for me. And just to illustrate that, I want to take you back to my first year where we had topics such as anatomy and histology. I struggled a lot with those topics, particularly with retention. I'd learn, I'd cram for the exams, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, 70% of the material was gone. And you could say, okay, well, whatever study methods you were using back then, they served their purpose, right? You passed your exam. But a lot of these topics, especially as you go through medical school with pathology, with physiology, the sad fact is you can't really forget this stuff. You may be able to forget some minor details, some little points, but you can't forget them. Or you should try not to forget them as much as possible, because they're going to serve you on clinical rotations, certain physiology concepts, certain pathology concepts. And probably more importantly and more relevant to this video, it's going to serve you on your USMLE, on your step 1, on your step 2. So with Anki, I found it really helped my retention. Things that I would be forgetting a few weeks after major exams, they're still with me weeks, months, years later. So that's a really big advantage to it. There's one more tip that I'd like to share about Anki, which is if you've ever used Anki and you've sat at your computer, just tap in the space bar and working away, you might notice it's easy to zone out after a while. It can get a little bit boring. Let's just say it how it is. One thing that I found helped me immensely was to install Anki on my phone and to do it while I walked around in my apartment. There is something special about doing Anki whilst you do a very low level exercise with your body. I found it just stimulates enough of your brain to kind of keep you always alert and always active. It almost activates the learning part of your brain more than if you just sit. And not only that, but you get some exercise in. So I would 100% recommend that anyone that actually wants to do Anki seriously and has a lot of cards to work through each day, install Anki on your phone and do your reviews, at least your reviews, if not your new cards. Do it whilst you walk around your apartment, or whilst you walk on the street, or whilst you walk in the park, or whatever. But do it whilst having some kind of low level exercise. I did initially do it while I was walking to a local park that I live next to. It did kind of get me into almost got me into a few accidents. So Likewise in the park, you end up tripping over branches eventually. And plus it all takes time. So eventually, to be honest, I was just mostly doing it while I was walking around in my apartment. But whatever. The point is, I do find walking around whilst you do your Anki very, very, very helpful. Anki just also straight up improved my class performance. I mean, before maybe I'd be 50th percentile in class. Afterwards, after I fully adopted it into my sort of study routine, I'm normally 1 to 1.5 deviations above class average, and most of that I would put down to Anki. Most of the exams that I do with my class, I'll end up in the top 25, normally even top 10% of the class. And I'm not boasting. All I mean to say by that is that that's just proof that Anki does work really well if you can do it properly. The next thing that I want to discuss is following a schematic. This will sound a little bit complicated, but if you can kind of see what I mean, I follow the schematic with everything now. Step 1 or not step 1, just studying for normal school exams, I still follow this. I think it works great. So say you're working through UWorld. Say you realize, oh no, I consistently do badly with neuro. What you might decide is, okay, it's time for me to properly learn neuro, cover it, make sure it's done. So the way I would approach this with my kind of schematic method is learn that topic fully. Do what you need to do. If it's first aid, you read through first aid. If it's reading through some other book, that's fine. If it's watching all the B&B videos, whatever. The point is, cover that topic with whatever resource you love to learn it, maybe not 100%, but 90%, right? After you've learned it and you're confident in your knowledge, you want to test it a little bit with Anki. Not only test it, but now help retain it. So you do all your Anki cards. If learning the material might have taken you 3-4 days, Anki might also take you a couple days. And after you've done that, you're kind of ready to test that knowledge that you've learned. So I would then go on to a first question bank. Not UWorld yet. UWorld you want to leave for last if you're learning a topic like this. Maybe run through Amboss. So if it was neuro, I would select all the neuro questions in Amboss and run through them. And at this point, you've learned all the content from your video or book resource. You've learned everything there is in the Anki, and you're patching and identifying weak areas with your first question bank. So you've covered quite a lot of material by that stage. And by the end of that, once you've patched any weak areas identified by the first question bank, which would be Amboss or maybe Kaplan or whatever you want to use, then move on to UWorld. And just like you did with your first Q bank, you're running through it, hopefully getting a lot of them right, and again, identifying any weak areas. Or maybe spinal cord tracks, you keep getting it wrong. Or anytime I see a brain CT scan or a brain X-ray, not X-ray maybe, but CT scan or MRI, you start freaking out. You want to, again, identify that, look for what you struggle with, and patch that as you go. And by the time you've run through that cycle of learning, reinforcing with Anki, and running through 2 cube banks, patching your weaknesses each time as you go along, you should be in quite a strong position. And if you just now, this is the final step, you just stay on top of your Anki reviews, you should be at least 80% golden on everything you've learned, even months or even years down the line. You will retain a lot of it as long as you keep up with your Anki reviews. So it's the schematic that I would suggest of learning properly, then Anki, then testing once with 1 Q bank, normally the less good Q bank, whatever that might be. No offense Amboss, no offense Q bank, but no offense Kaplan, but it is the reality. Patching any weak areas you identify with that first Q bank, and then a final test with the second Q bank, which would be UWorld. And again, patching any weak areas. And from there, all you got to do is Anki reviews, and you're done with that topic forever. On to the next one. And the next thing, before we get into the real nitty-gritty, is just to discuss a daily routine that you might want to consider doing during your dedicated period or during your study period. The way I broke it down, and I thought this worked fantastically for me, was in the morning, before I had any breakfast, before I did anything, I'd run through all my Anki reviews. This might take 2 hours, this might take 3 hours. If it's a horrible day, it might take you 4 hours. But do it. And then once you do that, only then you can have your breakfast. especially if it's like a longer session, it can get a bit difficult towards the end. But if you do manage to stick with that, I find compartmentalizing your day in that way really kind of gives you clear objectives for the day as you go. So, as I said, you start the day with your Anki reviews, and you don't do anything else until you finish them. The next thing, you'd have some breakfast, you have some food, and then you do your UWorld. So you've done all your reviews, they're out of your mind. Now we work through UWorld. You might do 2 blocks, might do 3 blocks. If it's a particularly tight day, you might do 4 blocks. I personally found 2 to 3 blocks was kind of perfect. 4, and you start working on autopilot, and you start not thinking and learning perhaps from questions as well as you could. And then after you're done with your UWorld blocks, really I'd say comes the most important part of the day. So you've done your Anki reviews. Say you wake up at 9 in the morning, you've done your reviews up until 12. You had some breakfast. Say 1 o'clock you start your UWorld blocks. It's about 7. You might want to have a little bit to eat. That's your dinner. And now 8 o'clock. This is the most important part of the day, in my opinion. This is where you start covering new material. So any areas that you've identified over the last days or weeks, or even on that day in your UWorld questions, you want to look for weak areas. You might identify, wow, nephro, I suck at it. Anytime I see BUN, creatinine, anytime I see a kidney slide, it's not going well for me. I start sweating, I start struggling. So you might identify that as a weak area. And this evening time, this, I don't know what you can manage, 2, 3, 4 hours, that's when you retread or tread freshly new ground. That's where you brush up on your weak areas. So in my case, I might on Monday identify, after I've done my Anki reviews in the morning, after I've done my UWorld blocks, I might identify, so nephro I'm not good at. And so for the next few days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'd be focusing only on nephro. Maybe Monday and Tuesday, I would just watch the Boards and Beyond videos, or USMLE Express videos, whatever. And then Wednesday, Thursday, I do also Anki on nephro. And then ideally, by the time you get to Friday, you've kept up all your Anki reviews, so you've not hemorrhaged too much information. You've done UWorld, so you've hopefully learned some new concepts. And by the time you get to Friday, hopefully you've mastered a whole new topic that either you struggled with or you hadn't covered before. So just to summarize that, morning reviews, daytime UWorld, which is mostly learning new concepts or identifying weak areas, and then evening is when you reinforce or work on those weak areas. So we've discussed the more sort of vague, maybe nebulous, philosophical approaches to how you should approach your dedicated period, or at least what I found very helpful. You don't have to do it, but really helped me out. The next few tips that I'd like to give are sort of more specific, more sort of detail-orientated things around your dedicated period. And that is, say you're right now, you've just booted up UWorld and you're working through one of the blocks. Say it's a 40-question block. This is a tip that I read on Reddit by, I think, a past exam taker. And it changed my life. It changed my life on UWorld, and I think it helped me a huge amount on the exam itself. I think if I hadn't learned this tip, not only would my dedicated have been much worse than it was, but I think my performance on the day would have been a lot worse. And I still remember this tip to this day. I carry it forward now as I'm studying for Step 2. I will still be utilizing this tip. So you might ask me, what is this hot tip that you want to share? What is this tip that I'm dying to convey to you? It's this. It's kind of a simple one, but it really has a lot of impact if you implement it fully. That is 1 minute. 1 minute per question. That's all you get. 1 minute per UWorld question, 1 minute per USMLE Step 1 or Step 2 question. That's all. I found that tip completely changed everything for me. To begin with, it was very difficult to put into action. I'd just be running out of time. maybe even be reading a question. But oh no, 1 minute. And so what do? You move on. You might only read 60% of a question. You might have read 100% of it, but you're not sure on the answers. You pick a random answer and you move on and you flag that question. What is the logic behind this? Because I was surprised to find this, but when you come back to that question later on, some of what you read stays with you. And more importantly, you get new perspectives when you come back to it than if you had maybe stayed on it and maybe mulled on it for 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. Not only that, but that sharpness, it kind of forces you to focus. I don't know if other people have this, but I tend to sometimes just drift off. I'll be reading a question, I'm 2 lines in, and my mind just starts thinking about dinner, or it starts thinking about, oh, I'm tired. Oh, what was that YouTube video that I was watching earlier? My mind just goes somewhere else, and it happens surprisingly often if I don't follow this rule. If I do follow the rule, somehow my mind goes into gear, and it tells myself, shut up, read the question, answer, and move on. It stops my mind from drifting, and it keeps me nice and quick. And another benefit is that it gives you 20 minutes at the end of every block to go over those either questions that you rushed through or questions that you're not sure about. You'll find as time goes on and as you maybe become more proficient in this technique, less of that 20 minutes at the end of the block will be spent on answering questions that you skipped, and more of it will be spent on questions where you're just not sure, which is a big gain. Maybe at the beginning you're skipping 5-10 questions a block because you're running out of time if you use this technique. Towards the end you might only skip 2 or 3, but now you have 20 minutes to answer those 2 or 3, and then another 15, 16, 17 minutes to focus on questions that you're just plainly not sure about. So huge tip, really helped me on exam day, really helped me with step 1 prep, really helped me with assessment exams. Highly recommended. So my next piece of advice is maybe a little bit controversial. I know a lot of people don't like the Reddit step 1 section. They'll say how reading it makes them depressed, or makes them feel like they're behind, like they're not doing enough, or like they want to kill themselves. Look, if you can just hold off from killing yourself and just read what people are posting, you might pick up a lot of good tips, which is to say, during the time that I was monitoring the Reddit step 1 section, I'd pick up a lot of study tips. I'd pick up a lot of technique tips. I'd see how other people are doing. I'd see how much I can expect to improve in my practice scores as I go forward. Now, everyone's an individual, everyone has their own capability, but we all still follow certain rules of physics and certain rules of what's possible. So personally, even though, yeah, at times it did make me feel a little bit nervous, I feel I got more out of spying on other people, spying on their techniques, stealing some tips here or there, than if I just forego that altogether. So my next tip with the daily nitty-gritty stuff is just another approach to approaching your UWorld blocks. As you're working through your questions, you've got your 40 questions, just imagine you're on question 1 now. I'd suggest keeping a notepad on the side. Why? The reason is, as you're working through, you're going to come across new concepts or new questions or new scenarios which you're uncomfortable with. Some of which you're gonna open up and you're gonna be like, oh wow, this is instantly familiar to me, I'm good with it. But you're gonna get some questions where you're thrown off from the beginning. Either the lab values don't make sense, or either the kind of presentation of the patient doesn't make any sense. And you're gonna feel nervous, you're gonna feel like you don't know this topic at all. And you should write that down. As you're working through, at the time, as you're working through, just quickly on the side on that notepad, write down nephro, constant weak area, or presentation of young patients with intellectual disability. Maybe you notice anytime you get a kid in a test question with some kind of intellectual disability, you're not sure how to narrow it down. Write that down. Kids with intellectual disability, that's an issue. Maybe it's every time you see a brain CT scan, you freak out. Write that down. Because the impression you have at the end of the test, when you get your correct and your incorrect, will be very different than the impression that you have during your test. And what I found is that I can pick up on weak areas in some ways more efficiently while I'm doing a test. I can do it more efficiently than at the end of a test. And so if you're doing that during a test, the question is, okay, so I've done my blog. What should I focus on then? I found during my UL reviews, that time at the end where you're reviewing, that was a better time to learn individual concepts. So, here's a new scenario, here's a new point, a new detail. All right, let me add that to my Anki cards. Or, let me quickly refresh that in first aid. But just to simplify it, so I found picking up on weak areas during an exam, write them down as you identify them, and then learning individual new concepts that you might not have come across. That's what you do as you're going through your corrects and incorrects. Finally, I want to diss first aid. I want to talk smack about it. I've referred to it a few times in this recording. I found it does have some use as a reference. If I want to just quickly read about, I don't know, Turner syndrome, or I quickly want to read about some nephrotic syndrome, yeah, I'm going to open first aid because it's quick. I'll just control F and I'll look for whichever topic I'm looking for. It takes a few seconds. But I don't like this, I don't know what it is, it's like a trend or this idea or this meme where a lot of step 1 dedicated studies should be focused around first aid. Now, you do you. If you love first aid, if you love reading dry books, you go for it. Well, what's the common thing stated on forums or in discussions? Oh, you got to do 3 passes of first aid. Oh, I'm on my 4th pass. I don't get these guys. I didn't do half a pass. All I did was, when I didn't understand a topic or I wanted to quickly refresh my opinion of a topic, I'd looked it up in first aid, and that wasn't a very frequent thing. I would suggest, personally, if I'm recording a video for myself, skip first aid. Only use it as a reference, but as a core study resource, I think it's very limited. I think it's very dry, and I don't think it's all that helpful, to be honest. So yeah. Finally, a bit of an unusual topic, which is extra. And what I've written here on my paper, which I keep looking at, is substances. Now, I don't want to get you into any trouble. I don't want to make you hurt your body. I don't want to make you do anything that you shouldn't do. But I'm just sharing my experience, and I'm just saying what worked for me. There's a couple substances that I feel if I didn't use them, not only would my dedicated period have been a lot less pleasant and a lot less easy to work through. Again, on the day of my step 1 exam, I feel it would have been 10 times harder, and I'm pretty confident I wouldn't have performed in the way I did. So the first substance that I found really helped me was something called ashwagandha. It's best described as an anxiolytic. It gets rid of your baseline anxiety. If you imagine as you're doing a test, your baseline anxiety might be 90%. I found this substance, it takes that baseline kind of stress down to 20%. Particularly important for me because I find, I don't know how it works for you, but for me, when I'm stressed, especially when I'm, highly stressed, as you might be on exam day, I can't think straight. I'm reading and my mind drifts off. It's like the stress kind of paralyzes me. So I need something like this to take me a little bit down. It's not an issue if I'm physically out on a ward and I don't know, the movement kind of calms me down as well, I guess. But if I'm sitting in front of a computer, I need this to lower my stress levels. And yeah, I found it immensely helpful. And I'm pretty sure without this substance, I'd have had a lot more problems focusing on questions on test day and during maybe practice assessments. I would just like to note, ashwagandha in some people with liver problems has caused some issues. There have been a few case studies or a few cases. Bear in mind, I'm not saying you must take this stuff. I'm not even saying you should take this stuff. All I'm saying is do your own research. Next substance, theanine. The best way for me to describe it is if ashwagandha lowers your baseline stress to maybe, down here, theanine works a little bit differently. It's an interesting substance. If you take it with caffeine, I found it improves my focus. So if caffeine maybe gives me, I don't know, let's put a number on it. Let's say a 50% focus bonus. With the theanine, it starts getting to about 100%. You do get the caffeine boost just a little bit more. But if you do take theanine with caffeine, it also takes away the stress effects of caffeine. You know, the jitters, or sometimes can get a little bit hyperactive, which can almost counterproductively reduce your focus. I found it got rid of that. So you got all the good effects of caffeine, but it kind of, it pushed away the bad effects. So there's that. If you take theanine with caffeine, it has these kind of modulating effects. Or if you just take theanine on its own, then it just kind of works a little bit like ashwagandha in that it lowers your stress further. Personally, I found my body reacts a little bit differently in that, say you're faced with a stressor, someone shouts at you or something, or maybe, or you see a bad UWorld question. Oh no, you start sweating. What theanine will do is it'll blunt that stress response. I'll be reading through the question, and instead of me being thrown off and suddenly getting stressed, it kind of gets rid of that. So if ashwagandha lowers your baseline stress, theanine kind of stops you reacting to new stresses, if that makes sense.